Today on RPI Tech Connect, we're taking a closer look at supply chain as a starting point for a cloud migration. By optimizing processes, standardizing data, you can better prepare your business for a successful cloud implementation. Stick around to find out how you can get started. Welcome back to RPI Tech Connect. I'm your host, Chris Airy. We've got a special guest today, Ms. Stephanie Marquez. Stephanie is a principal supply chain management consultant at RPI. But what makes her an especially interesting guest on today's episode is her involvement in just about every aspect of business. From project management and strategizing to marketing and sales, Stephanie is a contributor of all sorts. Stephanie, is there anything else you want to share with the audience before we get started?
Sure. Thanks, Chris. First of all, I just want to say thank you for having me today. I love participating in this side of our business and our organization. So I'll just take a moment, tell you a little bit about myself. As Chris mentioned, I'm a principal supply chain consultant with RPI. I've been a part of the team for going on 5 years now, but I have a pretty diverse work experience background. But I've been working in the supply chain space for about the last 14 years. In that space, I've worked as a buyer, sourcing manager. I've done some inventory and logistics coordinating. I've worked as a contract administrator and a systems application administrator prior to joining RPI. Before that, I worked for a large healthcare system here in Western New York in contracts and item master management. So ultimately ended up there in systems application. But as you mentioned, my role has really kind of evolved. And one of the things I love most about our organization and what I get to do is we can pretty much be involved as much or as little as we want to outside of our traditional, consulting roles. So when leadership or other teams like yourself approach me with these types of activities, I'm really excited to be able to participate, and I always like to jump in. So I appreciate how much it helps me really get like a pretty well-rounded view of what we do, who our clients are, and just other aspects of the business and the organization. And as you mentioned, I like to contribute really in all areas. I've helped with things such as creating curriculum and facilitating trainings and webinars. So if you're joining us today, you may have heard my voice or seen my face before. So I'm just glad to be with you.
A couple of things you do there, but we're super excited to have you on the show today. So thanks for being here with us. I really wanted to take this time today to kind of take a look at what's been going on in the Infor space, and particularly with this, this extension of on-prem support to 2030. It's 2024 now, and we're 1 year closer to that looming deadline. So I'm curious, what kind of initiatives are you encouraging our clients and prospects to take from an SCM point of view to kind of help prepare for that move?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. We've definitely seen kind of this shift in the ecosystem as far as a sense of urgency with that extension of on-prem support for some of those Infor clients who may have or were going to start their migrations now have delayed. But with that said, it really does give those users and those current customers a unique opportunity to help position themselves really to kind of just hit the ground running, be totally ready for when that time comes. Recently, you and I had the opportunity to work together on a webinar series. I was joined with a couple of my other teammates, Juan Menendez and Ayana Brown. We did a 3-part series, and we actually addressed this very topic. With that, it really started with our team just kind of brainstorming internally what could be some things that would add value to existing Lawson customers and what they could do today, what could they focus on, while they're still on those earlier versions of Lawson before that Cloud Suite migration. I think when we worked on this, our initial list was something like 25 different, initiatives or things that could be done. And needless to say, to kind of craft what that webinar series was, it was pretty difficult to narrow it down because we all felt that they were incredibly important and really beneficial to those users. But we, through a lot of teamwork, were able to kind of break it down into categories. And that's how we approached that, right? So we talked a little bit about how folks might be able to focus their efforts really on process improvements and optimizations in their current state. We then kind of broke it off into like data standardization, cleanup of older transactional data, And those are topics that we cover all the time with Cloud Suite implementation. So as clients might be using their Lawson system a little bit longer than originally anticipated with that date push out, those are really areas that they can focus on to improve their day-to-day, even in just current state. So, when we get to these Cloud Suite migration projects, those three generally tend to be areas that we find clients have the most challenges during the Cloud Suite migration. So, I mean, it really, just to kind of, I don't know, break it down a little bit further, when you take the approach of improving your existing process now, right? Documenting what those processes are in your current state. When clients get to that migration, it really helps them kind of shift their focus on designing more of a robust system, or taking advantage of more automation where maybe as they weren't before, rather than having to, quote, clean up or improve a broken process. We find clients who don't have processes that are working very well for them, they oftentimes tend to lack in confidence when we get to those different stages of projects. And we just spend a lot of time during those Cloud Suite migrations helping them to kind of strip back, what they're doing, take a look at it. And sometimes, I hate to say it, but sometimes we have to start from scratch. Um, it's yeah, it's a pretty big level of effort.
It seems like maybe like an inevitable, but uh, while it might be painful, it's good in the long run, right? To kind of
Oh,
like start from,
absolutely.
yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. It's like, it's one of those things where, you're going to have to put in, like you said, that level of effort up front, but you reap the rewards later on down the line. We talked, or I mentioned, data standardization. It's really kind of one of those areas that we encourage clients to focus on the consistency of their data, not just the data in the system, but how it's being maintained, who's maintaining it. We're all familiar with the phrase garbage in, garbage out, and that really applies in this type of scenario too. And a Cloud Suite implementation project really is this, I don't know, it could be for some folks in an organization, once in a lifetime opportunity to get a shiny new system, right? And you want that to be functioning, top notch with the best data possible. I think it's also helpful to point out that a lot of things are a little bit different in the new world or in Cloud Suite as opposed to earlier versions of Lawson. So things that clients may be accustomed to in terms of error handling are generally just different. So if supply chain has the opportunity to focus on item master data, which really is kind of very foundational for supply chain, and all the places that item master data touches throughout the system, standardizes it, standardizes who's maintaining it, what their processes are, it's really going to go a long way.
Got it. I want to revisit something you mentioned earlier. So when you were meeting with the rest of the, supply chain team, everybody had ideas on like what initiatives they can get started with, and you had a laundry list of things they could do. But I'm
Yep.
curious, like, how do you prioritize what what takes precedent and what takes, what gets maybe the back burner as you're preparing for these moves? Like, what data quality is a big one, but I'm
Yep.
curious what that prioritization kind of looks like. How do
I'm
you,
glad you
yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because I actually had a differing opinion than some of my colleagues.
Uh,
So whereas my focus primarily was on the data, one of our other senior supply chain consultants who has 30 plus years of experience and has been in the industry much longer than myself, his priority was more focused towards that process optimization, and that process improvement aspect of what was currently happening day to day. And we had a really candid conversation. I was like, well, why do you think that? Like, what, sell me on it, essentially. And just the way that he was able to break it down, yes, the data is important. That should obviously go without saying. But if you have people who are resources to your organization, who are bogged down with broken processes, disparate processes, or you have 5 people doing something 5 different ways, it costs the organization a significant amount of money in the time that it takes for those processes just to kind of get through the system. So he actually sold me on that, and I said, okay. We selected a couple of process improvement initiatives, one of which seemed a lot easier to me to get going, and one seemed a little bit more complex. It required collaboration with IT, with the clinical areas in healthcare, with, supply chain, with finance. And I said, oh, you would do that one later, right? Because it's more of a heavier lift. He was like, no, absolutely not. I would do that first. So even kind of getting a little bit more granular as to far as which process improvements we, had, it wasn't necessarily a difference of opinion, but he just helped me to kind of see, really breaking it down, the bigger picture.
Got it. That makes sense. And I imagine like it's probably somewhat of a common occurrence for folks to have, all these different people who work in different departments or like different functions within the department having differing opinions on what's
Oh,
most important
absolutely.
and what can't wait, what needs to get done now. So I imagine it's a balancing act.
Yep.
Um, and a lot of what you're talking about here sounds like general good practice anyway, like regardless of whether or not
Yep.
you're, planning to do a big cloud implementation or migration, like these are things that are going to help your business just be more organized, period. Is that
Yep.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's even, it's emphasized, right? When you're planning any type of big project, especially one like a migration or a cloud suite implementation, just kind of in my experience, most organizations are very data centric. And we have to be when we're talking about that cloud suite implementation experiences, and trying to standardize that data, come up with a process, clean it up. If you're doing all of that in conjunction with the actual project itself, it's a lot.
That's
It's
like a nightmare.
very overwhelming.
And it also feels like when folks are juggling multiple things at once, it's a recipe for like mistakes to be made. Something's
Yeah.
gonna get overlooked. Like you can only
Yep.
imagine that your resources are spread thin.
Right.
Um, and I think that like this raises a good point. I kind of want to make the distinction clear to the audience today is that these exercises that we're talking about here are like this is part of pre-planning, right? Like you're
Yeah.
planning, like preparing to plan for like
Mhm.
it's a different phase than actual like planning, right?
Yep.
Do you think you could? I'm not doing a great job of articulating the distinction between the two, but I'm hoping maybe you could do that.
Yeah. So I think, for me, pre-planning happens, like you said, before the plan. I think if you're talking about planning, in my eyes, that's much more specific to the project as a whole. There's a lot of different components that goes into it, so it's not just supply chain focused. When you're talking about pre-planning, you have the ability to really just focus those efforts on maybe those supply chain initiatives, and it's things that are going to improve your business and your process today that you can carry forward. So to me, that's the distinction of pre-planning versus planning.
Okay, got it. And like you're really just like taking that extra step to get your stuff organized.
Yeah, and it really can be a lot of different things, right? So it can be as simple as, like, it doesn't have to be this huge process that's being implemented or dissected. It can be something as simple as someone documenting what are those current processes. There are so many organizations that we visit that all of that information resides in somebody's head because they've been with the organization for 20 years. It could be collecting the documentation, right, that you use to train folks coming into the organization. Is that documentation up to date? Can we get it fresh? By doing all of those things, it really does lay a solid foundation for yourself and for those implementation partners, hopefully us, and really gives yourself an opportunity to build on what you already have, right? So by doing that, you make a positive impact on various larger project stages as discovery, designing of your system, end user training. I mean, like, literally, to sum it up, it's like pre-planning is getting your shit together before going on this like huge project. So
Nice. That makes sense. And so like it's like Inception project, like project
yes.
before project, but but you're doing it, and it's a worthwhile like effort, and it sounds like we're encouraging all like prospects and new clients like to take this extra step to kind of
Yes.
get things ready before. And so I guess like the top like supplies, I guess it's hard to like throw a blanket over it and be like, here are the best things that you should do from a supply chain perspective. But
Yeah.
sounds like data quality is a big one.
Big
Process
one.
optimization is another. Is there a third one that we could, is like a bucket?
Yeah, yes. So it's like once you have that data cleaned up, or sorry, standardized, what are you doing with it? I think when, some of our clients, I think one of our colleagues, they implemented a client this summer, and they had been on Lawson since like the late 90s. So, they had great processes in place. They had their data standardized, but what they didn't have was a method to kind of eliminate some of that transactional data that was essentially bogging down their current system. So cleaning up, right? The data standardization is cleaning up, and then it's like, all right, let's clean it out. What don't we need? This specific client that I'm thinking about, just as an example, because they had been on the system so long, they had in their current Lawson system something like, I don't know, it was like 20,000 plus vendor agreements. And that could be a huge underestimate, just because of the sheer amount of time that they had been on the system. And their subject matter expert worked with our consulting team, and they were able to say, along with leadership, of course, hey, what do we not want to bring into this new shiny system? Do we really need this, pricing agreement from 1998? No, we don't need that. So it offers up this other opportunity to say, what do we want to archive? What do we want to just maybe eliminate from the system? There's this time frame, right? Like you want your data to be in the system for a certain amount of time for regulatory legality issues, things like that. But you definitely don't need to bring data from 1998 into your system. So get rid of it. And so I think that initiative, I'd have to confirm my numbers, but ballparking it, I remember the consultant telling me they were able to get rid of like 10,000 records that they just didn't need anymore. And even that had an impact on their current day, right? Because during their project, they're still operating in that current Lawson system. But when it came time to migrate and came time for go live, it reduced the amount of downtime that they experienced from their system. It made their data validation go that much quicker. So it just snowballs into having all these other benefits that can sometimes be difficult to identify upfront.
So I imagine is it maybe sometimes challenging to like, I don't know, when you're working with these organizations to let them know that, hey, you can delete that, piece of data from 1998. Is there resistance there? Like, do people get, what is that?
Yeah, I think sometimes it depends. I think that the main thing that people want to know is if for some reason I need to get at that data, that I can. And that's where like, a data archiving solution comes into place. So it's taking that data and it's kind of storing it elsewhere, rather than having it in your current system. So if something were to happen and somebody needed to audit something from 1998, their IT or their tech team could get access to that information.
Got it. Okay. So you're deleting it, but also sort of moving it so that it's
Right.
it's not actively like a part of your system today. And
Correct.
okay. And I
Yep.
think that there's usually some, I don't know, it probably depends on the type of data that's being stored or archived here, but there's some general like time frame for
Hmm.
what you should keep and what you can retire. Do you know what that looks like?
So it's funny you ask that because I've had clients ask us that before, and I recently had a conversation with our team, and I believe the general consensus was something like 7 to 10 years.
Okay.
We couldn't really land on a specific number, but that's kind of the approach that's taken. Seven for sure. Seven is like the lucky number everywhere, right?
Hmm.
Like hold on to your tax records for 7 years, just kind of like the same thing. Hold on to your system data for at least 7 years. So, um, yeah. So I think that's kind of the rule of thumb.
Okay, got it. Well, thanks for kind of sidebarring with me there. This is super
Yeah.
valuable, both for, like not only for like supply chain professionals, but for anyone involved in like ERP management. It just seems like this is stuff that you should be thinking about, planning ahead for, and recognizing that, buying this new solution and like it's not like out of the box ready to go. There's a lot that goes into it. You think
Yeah.
about the length of these projects for move everything over, especially for those clients you mentioned who've been on Lawson for 20 years. It's like you got to like really reconcile what's been going on internally and how you've been doing things and what that process is going to look like on the new system.
Yep. That's a
Um,
great summary.
yeah, oh, thank you. So we're getting close to our time here, but I'm curious if you could offer the audience today one piece of advice regarding supply chain and pre-planning, what would it be?
I think my one piece of advice in supply chain and pre-planning is really, for me, collaboration is key. The more team members that can be brought into some of those pre-planning initiatives or projects, definitely are going to have, a greater success. There's no surprises there. And I think it's really important just to kind of emphasize that supply chain impacts so many other work streams within an organization. Finance, most specifically, if you're in healthcare, there's an impact to your clinical side, materials management. And so when you have that level of collaboration with the appropriate parties, it's mutually beneficial to literally everybody involved. So that would be my one piece of advice.
It's a solid piece of advice. And when you think about it too, it's like how many times throughout a professional career have you like started a project, made progress, and then like later throughout that like you know time frame you bring in new people and it's like they go on the board and they rewrite the whole script and it's like,
Yep.
man, this would have been really helpful to know from the beginning.
Yep.
So it just goes to show you that like more stakeholders is I don't know, maybe not always better, but especially for a situation like this, it's like you need the people who are going to be in the system, who've been using the system, who are going to be a part of the new system to be there, to have a
Yep.
seat at the table and to work
Yep.
together. And like you mentioned too, like even within like your own, practice area of supply chain, it's like the folks that you're working with have different ideas of what needs to be prioritized at what time. So
Yep.
love it. Super
And
good.
I think
Collaboration.
it's exactly. But I want to just quickly emphasize, because you said something about, bringing in more people. And I think sometimes people are afraid to do that because there are different points of view. And so it's this balance of making sure you get the right people at the
Mm.
table at the right time. I recently had a conversation with a previous colleague. This is even before RPI, and they were going through a large project. And the leader, he's amazing. He's very forward thinking. He's very collaborative. He's, one of the ideal leaders that you would want to work with over the course of your career. And when I asked him, I said, well, who are essentially your subject matter experts that you're going to be including in the project? And he hesitated. And I was like, wait a second. You don't you're not
Oh,
going to bring in an
yeah.
SME. And it was, well, they're busy. Well, yeah, they're busy, but those are the people that, hold the keys to the kingdom. Yes, you might be the leadership or you might be the stakeholder, but chances are there's somebody who's doing that task or those series of tasks every day that could tell you every bit of what you need to know and get it right the first time.
Dang, I'm surprised there was like they wouldn't think to include them from the beginning. It's like this is the person who's going to be in here all the time. You need
Yeah.
their buy-in.
Yeah, he definitely was like, "Oh no, they're going to participate and they're going to test and this and that." And I was like, "No, you need." And because I had worked with these people before, I knew their area of expertise, and I was like, "You need this person to cover this. You need this person to cover that." And it really was only like 3 people, but they had such a wide range of knowledge that it was everything that he needed out of those, 3 people. So I hope he adhered towards my advisement because we're friends too. But when he said that, I was like, "What?" I was my jaw probably hit the floor. So
From a professional perspective and also from like a personal one, it's like, dude, what are you doing?
yeah, exactly.
Nice.
Yep.
Okay, well, thank you for making that clear because that's an
Yeah.
important nuance to take note of here. It's you want the people who have the breadth, but also like you know not everybody from the same group like needs to be there.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yep.
okay.
You got it.
Okay, cool. Well, we're getting to the time here. Any closing remarks you want to share with today's audience?
I mean, I really appreciate you asking me to participate. It's always fun kind of chatting with you and sharing what might be beneficial to our audience. So, I hope we've left people with some really thought-provoking information for them to consider, and I would say, I'll plug our webinar series. If you want more information, go check it out. It's out there somewhere on the ether, but there's definitely a lot of good information out there. So I just appreciate you asking me to participate in this.
Of course. Well, thank you for joining us. Your stories from the consulting road are invaluable. People need to hear like what it's like from your shoes and what's been going on in the world. So appreciate your time. And
Absolutely.
for those of you listening in today, if you need help with supply chain initiatives or pre-planning or a combination of the two, feel free to contact us at podcast@rpic.com. Again, that's podcast@rpic.com. Until next time, I'm Chris Airy, and this is RPI Tech Connect. Thanks for stopping by.